welcome to this episode 202 of Frame and Reference. You're about to drop into a conversation between me, Kenny McMillan, and my guest, ARRI lens specialist, Art Adams. Enjoy. Yeah, I think I've told you this before, but your articles, A, got me through the end of college in terms of, getting better at just camera work in general. But B, I randomly was offered the job at Pro Video, and I was like, wait, the one Art works at? And they're like, oh yeah, he's one of our writers. I was like, oh shit. Like,
Wow.
I still reference some of those
Cool.
some of those articles you've written. They're still very valuable, even if they're talking about like the DV era, even.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I wish I could. Well, I mean, hopefully I can do more again. We're talking about maybe I'll do one a month or something like area related or something like that.
Yeah.
Just the job gets so crazy sometimes that then the idea of going home and spending days writing an article is just. But I miss it.
I have the same, like, now that I'm doing a lot more work this year, mostly shooting documentaries, and it's the same thing. It's like I especially if I have to edit anything, I don't want to like then just turn off the edit and then just start writing, because that was the thing that I really appreciated about your articles that I think is missing in a lot of like film schools or obviously Pro Video or anything, is like it I think the sort of review space has made everything, even if it's not an ad, just kind of formatted as one almost. And there's not a lot of, like, my whole thing was like, I'll only do a review if possible. Obviously the pandemic changed some things, but like, I'll only do a review of something if I can use it. A lot of camera companies were not chill with it. Like, you can have it for a week. And I was like, oh, I hope I have a gig this week, but yeah, that the more like in-depth, like, let's test what they're claiming. My thing was always send me your like PR sheet, and I'm just going to test everything you say. I'm just going to put and I'm going to compare. Like, there was a few, I won't name them, but there's like one company that's like, you're not allowed to compare our stuff to like other cameras and stuff like that. I'm always like, okay.
Yeah, we don't worry about that.
No. Yeah. I try to think of myself as a journalist, and not just like camera guy, but,
yeah, I feel like my side gig was, while I was a DP, my side gig was educating. Basically taking what I learned and then teaching it to other people, because I like to write and I like to, if I can formulate it in my head and get it out on paper or, on a website, then I know I've got it. And then other people can get it too. And then at some point my side gig became my main gig, and it's actually been kind of fun.
Yeah. Cause that's the other thing too, right? Like at least for me, I'm an idiot. And so I need to know, like, if I can teach it, that means I know it. If I can't teach it, I don't know it well enough. Dude, a big one was speed boosters.
Oh, yeah.
Because everyone gets speed boosters wrong. And I would ask like Matthew, like Douglas, I'd be like, all right, in email, I'd be like, all right, one more time. Can you, and I have like the ASC manual where it's like written out, and I'm like, I'm looking at it going, I still don't think I got it. Like,
yeah. I totally get that. I find that if the subject is really complex, I read it. I'll read it and I'll say, I don't know what's going on, and I'll read it a week later, and okay, I got 10% more, and I just keep going through it and going through it and going through it. Yeah, I think that's part of it, is that there's some things that I have a hard time getting my head around. So I find ways to distill it down so that I can understand the gist of it. And then I run it by someone who knows it. They say, yeah, that's basically it. And then I go, okay, now I can share.
Yeah. The big thing that screwed me up, like, I think but just because you're a lens guy now, I think speed boosters is the one that I've been thinking about the most, like up to us chatting, is like, it's such a simple concept that I think gets distorted. And I think a lot of things with lenses can be distorted, but it's like, okay, so it makes it brighter, and then you get into trouble with people saying like, because the f-stop technically changes, not the the t-stop changes, but because you're putting optics in there, you're not getting a shallower depth of field, you're actually getting a deeper depth of field because it's now a wider lens. And also there's no such thing as the full frame look.
Oh boy.
Didn't you wrote like a whole article, like a series of articles about full frame, didn't you?
Yeah, and I'm still thinking about it. We just had the 265 come out, and this whole topic came up again. So, and there's so much stuff that interacts that it's actually really difficult to make it a simple thing. But I mean, it's the bottom line is, as far as I can tell, it's mostly about focus.
Yeah.
Because you're using a longer lens to capture the same angle of view at the same distance as another camera with a smaller sensor. So your depth of field drops. So like between a Mini LF and an Alexa 35, I think it's one. I remind myself that it's one standard focal length.
Right.
So if I'm on a 35 on the Alexa 35, I'm going to be on a 47 or 50 on the Mini LF to get the same angle of view. But I drop half my depth of field, which is pretty cool. And what I found is if you look at a lot of wide shots, especially on the 65, a wide shot where the background's out of focus is really captivating. There's such a sense of depth separation, especially if you're on a knees up shot on a person. It almost looks like the person's against a backdrop. It's almost like it's a cutout sensation in certain situations that I find really, really interesting. I do find that you can lose it if you see the ground and you see what the person's standing on, and you find there's this visual connection between where their feet are in the background. You can lose some of that. It helps if you don't see that connection. But yeah, there's that. And then close-ups, I think to me, it feels like if you're focused on someone's eye and the depth of field is so shallow, it's almost like it's almost like their face is pressing out of the screen in a way. So it's interesting. There's two very different things going on with depth perception with large format. Right. And I don't know that anyone's done a lot of work on this. It's just
and the key too, right, is you said at the same distance, because then you get into the talk about like, well, technically, if you were to frame up the exact same thing, it would look the same, but the camera would be further back. So it's not that full frame gives you a shallower depth of field; that it allows you at the same distance to do that. It's not that the lens itself does it.
There's a master class that we did at Camera Mirage a few years ago, and it's on YouTube. And James Laxton talks about this, where you can keep the camera at the same distance and use a longer lens, or you can keep the camera at the distance you would normally work at and then put on the same lens that you might use otherwise and get a wider field of view, but with more detail.
Right.
And that's his strategy, because he finds that it's almost more intimate in a way where you can have this wider shot, you can see the character, you can see more of what they're doing. But then, yeah, you still get this large format effect. It's interesting. He goes into it and he does a really nice setup where he's got two people sitting around a table. It's in front of a bar, and the focus is on one of the people. He's on a 40 millimeter, and it looks like he's on a 28 or 25, and the background is so soft.
Right.
It's just, he really knows how to use that format.
Do you find that people are looking to get into like a 65 because of lensing? Because obviously there's not a lot of lenses for those massive sensors, or because of perceptive detail. Obviously, if you're going to shoot, 8K, 12K, whatever, yeah, you have more resolution, I suppose. But obviously with a larger sensor, your gradations are softer, your apparent sharpness is a little bit more. But why do you think there is such a push towards these larger formats now?
I think there's a bunch of things. It's interesting. The first few 265s that have come in to ARRI rental have gone out immediately on TV shows, of all things. It's really interesting.
Wow.
I think it's those gradations. I think it's the depth of field. I think it's the increased resolution, especially since now you're scaling down to UHD or HD, and oversampling always has a benefit. One of our lens gurus over at ARRI Rental, gentleman by the name of Christoph Hofsten, he's in Berlin. He talks a lot about how large format lets you see more of the character of a lens.
Yeah.
You see, and it comes across with a strength, but also a subtlety that you don't get in smaller formats.
Right.
And he's shown me how that works, and it's really fascinating. So I think that's, there aren't a lot of lenses for the 265, but you see more of what they do when you use them. which is really interesting.
Right. And that actually, speaking of speed boosters, that is one reason you could use a speed booster is if your lens is intended for a larger format. By focusing it down into a smaller format, you do get to see more of the character of that lens on your smaller sensor.
Yeah, it's a fascinating rabbit hole to look at the relationship of a lens to a sensor and what kind of detail you get. And one of the things that like Christoph has talked about is with large format. One of the benefits of the larger sensor is you just see more of the subtleties of everything, and you can do it with a lens that is actually more compromised, shall we say, has more character than you would be able to use on a smaller sensor.
Right.
So the large format gives you the ability to use lenses that you wouldn't get much out of on a smaller sensor.
Yeah.
But you would get more resolution and more character.
So when did ARRI start making their own lenses? Because obviously for the longest time, your master primes were made by Zeiss.
Yeah.
So when did ARRI start bringing? I mean, were they initially like taking, especially for the large format stuff, like taking, whatever C-Core Cs or something like that and rehousing them, or was there like an immediate in-house optical team or something like that? Because obviously you guys take a lot of pride in the products you make, and there's a lot of testing and stuff. But I was kind of wondering if you could explain that timeline to me.
Boy, I'm not sure if I can explain the entire timeline, but what I can talk about is the transition to digital, because that was a big deal. All our previous lenses were made for film, and film has very different requirements. It's mostly about the coarse detail and getting contrast in the coarse detail, because film is not a super high resolution medium. It's also interesting that you don't have anything between the film and the lens. In the digital world, you do. You've got the optical low pass filter, you've got spectral cut filters like an IR cut filter, you've got the cover glass, you've got about 3 millimeters of glass between the back of the lens and the sensor. That has an impact. And film lenses are not expecting to see that. It's almost like you dropped an additional optical element behind a film lens, and they will look completely unlike, well, not completely, but they will look unlike what they would look like in film. So for example, master primes look great on film, and the goal when they came out, and the goal with film was always to get the best image on film that you could, because the film had so much abstraction to it. That's where the abstraction layer came in.
Yeah, people
and then
were
with
detuning
digital
lenses for film.
No, they weren't detuning lenses. They were always trying to make the best lenses they could make. And then that flipped with digital, because digital was very clean and people felt that loss of abstraction. So basically people started trying to get funkier and funkier. It's interesting, master primes get used a lot these days at T1.3 because on a digital sensor, they have a little bit of a spherical aberration glow that comes through that you would not get in film. And it's all because that extra piece of glass is sitting there. So that was something we looked at when we started thinking about what are we going to do with the next round of lenses for digital. We started thinking, as we always do, how do we make something that lasts? How do we make something that is going to be relevant in 10 or 15 years? How do we make something that's going to stand up to remastering in the future? We don't know what's going to happen. Right now, we're mastering HDR at about 1,000 nits, but in the future, maybe people want 4,000. Maybe there's some special venues with 10,000. We don't really know what's going to happen. We do know that HDR tends to really stress a sensor and a lens, especially the lens, because you start seeing the aberrations in a lens a lot faster in HDR. So that all kind of factored into like, what is this look? And we don't make our own lenses. What we do is we design the look, and then we find someone who can make that look. And in this case, we've gone with a company in Japan that previously had done primarily medical and satellite optics, but really high-end stuff. And we went with them partially because they do really good work and they could hit all our specs, on time and on budget, but also because they didn't give us any pushback. Because the look of signatures was so different to anything that anyone had really done in a cinema lens before that we got a lot of pushback from other companies that we had worked with in the past who said this is not what a cinema lens should look like.
What were those arguments?
I don't know. I just know that we talked to a number of different companies, and they just looked at the specs and says this is not, I think also it wasn't a good match for perhaps who they were.
Mm.
Signatures have it's interesting. It's a beautiful clarity, but because the MTF has a very long roll off, everything looks very natural. So we don't punch the coarse frequency details that make lenses feel crispy and digital.
Mm.
We keep it going all the way down. So when you look at someone through these lenses, it looks like you're just looking at them, which is really difficult to do. But then the background goes out of focus we really spend a lot of time on that. And it's a very well balanced collection of optical aberrations because you can't get rid of all the optical aberrations. It's not physically possible. But you can get a nice balance where they kind of play together in a really interesting way. So we've had people say that these feel like very modern lenses with kind of a vintage look to them, which is kind of interesting. I find it fascinating how people describe lenses because we don't have the vocabulary for it. So
Right.
people will
It's
say,
very musical.
they're very creamy. Well, what does that mean? It could be a flare, could be flesh tone, could be the background, the bokeh. So when we talk about lenses to each other, it's interesting to hear what people say, but it's also really hard to figure out what they're actually talking about.
Right.
And everyone perceives this stuff differently, which makes it fascinating because I think we all learn from each other. I regularly will show lenses to people and they'll say, "Oh, I see this. I never really, okay, that's really interesting. I hadn't really picked up on that before." So it's a lot of fun.
Well, and everyone's description usually I find comes from comparison.
Mhm.
No one ever says like, well, I shouldn't say ever, but a lot of times, especially when you're talking to DPs, it's like, oh, these, and it's always the most popular one. So it'd be like, oh, these kind of remind me of a K35. And they don't mean that optically. They just mean that the vibe they get is sort of
Exactly.
vintagey or whatever. And that's close enough. Or like, oh, these are, they're sharp, but they're not clinical. They're like Sigmas. And you're like, all right, I get what you mean. But
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I just interviewed a DP. It's interesting. Signatures are getting used a lot for fashion.
as they
And
should, they're probably
but
my
what's
favorite
interesting
materials
is,
out there.
I mean, this one DP was saying, she likes a lens it's sharp. I don't think it's. I would describe it differently because to me, sharp and soft are deviations from natural.
Mm.
And I think these are very natural looking lenses, but she describes them as sharp because she finds them easy to focus. Um,
Mm.
and her description is kind of like they're very sharp, but they also have a soft, natural, organic nature to them. Okay, I get it, but it's yeah. Once again, it's one of those description things where what are they really saying? I totally get it, but the idea of having a sharp lens that's also soft is, I think, a little different. And for us, that comes down to that MTF where it just keeps going. But we keep the contrast fairly. The strange thing is, a really high resolution lens won't look sharp. It'll actually look softer because you're actually seeing more of the texture and detail and less of, like, say, a really contrasty lens might make the pores on my face stand out more because it can see the pore and it can see the darkness in the pore. And it's adding a lot of contrast to that. So it feels kind of crunchy and it comes out a bit more. But if I have a really high resolution lens, now it's going to go across the edge of that pore, into that pore, across the bottom, out the top. It's going to be basically like I'm just looking at somebody.
Gotcha. So high resolution, good. High contrast, not always good.
It
In
depends where
in
the
this in
contrast
this
is.
example,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. And a lot of the lenses that people say are crunchy, they tend to really pump the contrast in the coarse details and maybe not do the same in the fine details. So
mm,
everything feels like it's a little bit edged out, a little more cut out. And in film, that looks great, but that's not what we're really shooting anymore.
right. Has anyone used the signatures on film?
You can't. So
Oh,
that's a well, it's a great point. So we came out with this new lens mount, DLPL mount, because we had
right.
the PL mount originally we invented in the 80s because everyone had their own lens mount. And it was you were always trying to figure out ways to get lenses on different cameras. The PL mount was a standard. We invented it and then we gave it away. LPL is basically a bigger version of that with a shorter flange depth. So for the same reason that all the DSLR manufacturers are going to mirrorless, so they can get the back of the lens right up to the sensor. That really helps you with lens design because you can do a lot more easily.
Mm.
And we thought, well, why are we still working with a 52 millimeter flange distance with PL mount? There's no mechanical shutter in there anymore. We're not dealing with film cameras. Let's back it up to 44. And we couldn't have made signatures without doing that.
Even just that little, what is that, 7 millimeter difference?
It's like 8 millimeters. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
Interesting.
And I've really learned a lot about why we do certain things. And what's interesting is we usually do the hard things. So say if there's a lens that's 28 to 100 that someone else makes, we're going to make a 24 to 75. And when I ask why that is, I'm usually told, well, because we think 24 is more useful and it's more difficult and we can do it. So it's an interesting perspective. I think a lot of people dismiss our lenses for being very clean, but it's really hard to do that and do it in a way that is really malleable. That's the other thing that we hear a lot is that the look of the lenses is really malleable. And they're meant to be because, so for example, the look of any of our cameras, you can push around a lot in post. The lenses were actually designed with the Alexa 35 in mind because we knew it was coming when the lenses were in development. This was quite a while ago. We were already experimenting with that sensor. And that sensor gets crazy dynamic range.
Oh, yeah. You can't blow it out if you try.
Yeah, 9.3 stops over middle gray. It's really difficult, but that's also, you need a lens that will deliver that because we're all about color and nothing will whack color out faster than, veiling glare.
Yeah.
So we worked really hard to make a lens that will deliver everything to that sensor that a lens could deliver because otherwise why make the sensor? It just didn't make sense.
Right.
But there is something interesting in there. If you look at a highlight, you'll see there's a little glow. So if the sun's over here, you'll see this little glow around the sun that takes the edge off. And that's intentional because if you've ever seen an HDR demo where there's a really bright highlight and the camera is moving fast, it'll stutter. It'll go bang, 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 bang. And that's not anything electronic. That's your brain. And it does that with anything that's bright and moving. And we actually had a service call one time where a feature was monitoring green screen in HDR, and they kept asking, why is everything strobing? And it took a long time to explain to them that green contributes the most to your sense of brightness. So it's going to look brighter and you're going to see strobing on everything. And don't worry about it. It's okay.
It'll be fine in post.
It'll be fine in post. Yeah. Look at it on a worse monitor. You'll be much happier.
Yeah.
But that little glow is designed to take down the edge that contributes to that strobing.
And
because we're trying to find ways so that when you go back in the future and you remaster this in some crazy way, you're not going to find anything unexpected. We want it to look better than when you captured it, even though you're doing more to it.
Yeah. And I know you guys have, is it just the signatures that have like the drop-in filters in the back?
The Enzos have those too. They're a little bit different. The signatures, it was funny because the signatures came with a net holder on the back because we thought, we're basically a film company at heart and people use nets and why not make it easy? And it's just a ring and it's got a little groove around it. You put the net over it, you put a rubber band around it, trim it, and then magnets, right onto the back of the lens. And it's got 12 magnets, so you actually have 12 click stops, so you can orient the weave however you want, and then match it across all your other lenses in your set at the same time. But on a whim, we went to an eyeglass shop and had some acrylic diopters made. And we made them about a 0.5 millimeter too big, and then we just pressed them into the ring and we popped them on the back, and we're like, well, the focus marks went to hell, but this is really cool.
Right.
So then we started experimenting, and we came up with a formula. We have positive and negative elements, and they do opposite things. One is undercorrected spherical aberration, which makes everyone look like a movie star. You get a nice, beautiful glow, very soft face, very soft background. The background gets even smoother than signatures already are. You get some coma, so highlights take on this kind of shape that starts swirling around the outside edges of the frame. It's pretty cool. And then the negative elements give you overcorrected, which is what you see in a lot of old lenses, where the bokeh turns into a donut. You've got a dark hole in the center and a hot outside edge, like maybe a K35, something like that. It's the same general mechanism. And that still gives a softness to the face, but it's not glowing anymore. And then the background has a little bit more of a hard edge to it. It's a little busier, so it feels more energetic. The feedback we got on those was that the customers wanted the center to be sharper and the outside edges to be softer.
Sure.
So that's what we did with the Enzos. There's also a little bit more a difference with the interface. When you put an element on a signature lens, you're putting it onto the lens mount and not the back of the lens. So if you shim the lens, that relationship will change a little bit. On Enzos, it's actually on the back of the lens. So if you shim the lens, everything travels together. And that allowed us to do a little bit more with the optics. And we do have a lot of recipes too. We've been experimenting. So at some point, we're going to come out with some crazy new stuff.
Like a cookbook or like just more stuff?
More stuff. I mentioned Christoph Hofsten earlier. About a year ago, I went to Berlin and we spent a week just with his wall of optics. He has all of these elements and diopters on a wall, and he'll say, "Oh, I'm going to take one of these and put it with one of these, and we'll put it together and let's see what happens. Oh, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to turn this one around, and oh, that's much better." And we just did that for a week, and we got all of these crazy cool looks. And at some point, we're going to start cranking those out, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
That's rad. Yeah, because like when I think of, obviously you and Panavision are the two like big players in sort of high end optics and stuff. Certainly the two companies have taken very different approaches to how they make their lenses and stuff. But a lot of the times when I talk to DPs on this show, it's always like, and then Dan Sasaki walked in, So is those kind of like home adjustable lenses, so to speak, your little magnet filters and stuff, changing the look, is that kind of your guys's pocket Sasaki, as it were? Like, or do you have like a service where people are like, all right, I like the signatures, I want these detuned for a project?
It's really hard to detune those. We're playing with that, but there's such sophisticated lenses. It's like a sports car. If you get into the engine, you mess around too much, it's not going to run so well anymore. Right. But if you want to change the performance, you can put speed bumps on the track, and that'll do it too. And that's kind of what we're doing on the back. ARRI Rental has all these different lenses, and they've got their Dan Sasaki equivalents. Christoph is one of those. Matt Colsey here in Burbank is another one. And they'll tune their lenses to whatever you want, and they've got a decent. I mean, it's some really interesting stuff. But on the sales side, it's a different philosophy. We want to deliver the best product we can, but we also want to make it adjustable. And that was just how the rear optic thing came about. And also, not everyone can get their lenses tuned. Like if you're on a low budget feature,
right?
Can you get that done? If you're on a commercial, can you get a set of lenses detuned for a 1 or 2 day commercial? It's kind of difficult.
Right.
And this way you can swap them in or out. The other thing is on set, for example, on a close up, like how you're seeing us, you could use a really heavy optic and it looks great. If you use it on a wide shot, it's going to be a bit overwhelming. It's a little like diffusion. You want to back off. You can use heavier on close-ups and then lighter on backgrounds because there's more detail and you don't want it to mush out. Right. So there's a certain amount of, you can adjust it for the shot a bit more easily.
Yeah, I did. I took a note and then I did get back to it for a second, but because I'm very jump aroundy. But you'd mentioned MTF a couple times, which and out as like a roll off. MTF stands for modular transfer function.
Modulation transfer function. Yeah.
So clearly I don't know what the fuck it means. But I was wondering if you could explain what that is so that people know when you talk about it having a roll off, like what does that mean?
Wow. Okay. Let me see if I can do this one. Because I come at this from the perspective of DP, and sometimes some of these concepts are a little
That's all we need. We don't need the science of it necessarily. What does it mean for a DB?
So resolution in the perception of sharpness is all about contrast. And there's a difference between how a lens will handle contrast for really coarse details, like maybe hair and skin, which has much finer detail. And MTF basically measures the contrast across all of that detail. So you can see, all right, the lens is really, there's a lot of contrast. So I see a lot of detail in the coarse frequencies, but then when you get to the fine frequencies, it drops off, which means now you don't see a lot of contrast, which means that detail kind of flattens out.
Mm.
And there's actually a lot of lenses where that happens really quickly. And I see this on a lot of less expensive lenses where the coarse details are great and the fine details drop off, and it feels a little plasticky to me because that balance isn't there.
We're talking about high frequency details getting, it's almost like I'm thinking Photoshop, when you would do like frequency separation, but it takes place in the lens, correct?
Right. And it's a matter of can the lens reproduce that contrast? Because maybe as it gets smaller and smaller, maybe there's enough flare. The coatings are not good enough to reduce the amount of flare necessary to maintain the contrast. There's also details in how the optics are formed. For example, just a basic curve is great at focusing light through the center of it, but it's not great at focusing light from the outside edges at the same point as the center. And that has an impact. There's also astigmatism, which is when light will focus in one axis but not another. Because if you think about it, now I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but you've got a curve of the lens that will affect how light focuses that way, but then you've also got the shape of the lens. And both of those can be made uneven. Right. And they both affect how light focuses in different axes. Like one will focus, like a line like this might go soft. You've got astigmatism there, but a line like this might be okay. So the radial lines have one focus, and then the tangential lines, which go around, have another focus.
And that's why we have spherical elements.
Exactly. Spherical elements then take that part where, okay, the light through the center is going to focus here, light through the outside edge is going to focus here. You change the shape of the lens to kind of bring it back so they're all together. And most of the time that's good. Signatures, a big part of their look is really, really well corrected. And that has a lot to do with the bokeh and the rendition of skin and things like that. But sometimes if you let that go nuts, you get some really great effects, especially around the outside edges. And that's why you're always getting crazy stuff at the outside edges of older lenses. It's much easier to focus through the center than it is the outside. That was the thing they always struggled with. And depending on how they're trying to solve that problem, you get different looks. And that's what makes vintage lenses so interesting.
Well, and those vintage lenses, correct me if I'm wrong, like oftentimes were handmade. Now we have computers that are lapping glass and like making it, that my assumption has been for the longest time that like this explosion of new lenses coming out of China, all these random companies are oftentimes optically perfect because they're just computer made and in many cases boring. Like you get it, it's like, this is great.
You said that.
It's kind of boring because it's like a computer made it, there's not really, yeah.
No, that's exactly what I see. I look at these lenses and I go, yeah, technically they're great. They don't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And that was why we did what we did and tried to do some stuff with the aberrations that were still left. I mean, there's always this human element. And, I don't know enough about how we balanced all of that. I just know that I love the look. I like lenses where I can see the subtleties in a frame. I want to feel the texture of the wood. I want to feel the sunlight bouncing off the floor and lighting up that corner. I want to see the direction of the shadows. I really want to feel what the shot, I want to feel the shot even though I'm not there. That's what really gets my attention when I see that kind of thing. It just gets me so excited. I love thinking, especially when I see a DP who lights in a very natural, a beautiful way. And I just say, that probably looked like that. That could look, that environment could look like that. And it's just beautiful.
Right.
I just love that. And I like lenses that show me that.
As a DP and as an educator, then what are some of the things that you've seen when people are evaluating uh, a new camera, where they see, example footage like you're talking about, and then they go, oh, I should get whatever, a Venice, an ARRI, a Canon, Sony, whatever, when they should be looking at the lenses?
It's interesting because you almost got me started on cameras because
I mean, you're gonna have to a little bit. That's that's your OG baby.
exactly. So what you said earlier about learning through comparison is really, that was, I I believe in that very strongly, because I think anything on its own can look pretty good. It's when you start comparing it that you really start educating yourself as to what it's doing. One thing I've learned about cameras, and I spent a lot of time as a DP looking at camera color. I was fascinated by it. And what I learned is that there are a lot of cameras that maybe do color reasonably well, but maybe not with a fine brush. But people don't notice because they're generally more tuned to the texture of color within a frame than they are to the actual colors.
Mm.
And you can go see beautiful abstract paintings with 3 colors. And they're interesting, visually interesting, but maybe if you want to see something with a much more subtle range of colors that blend into each other and much more subtlety, maybe that's, there are cameras that can't really do that well.
Mm.
So it's been interesting to kind of see how people perceive color, because I think there's this idea now that all cameras kind of can look the same. It depends on how much work you want to put into them. We developed our latest version of our color science slug C4, or also we call it Reveal, because it does. We actually took 3 different color gamuts and auditioned them with colorists. And so these are the options. Which one do you like? And they all chose the same one. So that's the one we went with.
Mm.
That's the kind of stuff that we try to do. We try to deliver the best color, but we also try to make it so that the people who have to work with it can get where they want as quickly as they can. And then the lenses factor into that as well. Now, you may not want a lens that delivers great color, and that's fine. There's lots of stories that accept lens flares very well, or can be muted, or have, it's more about the vibe than it is about seeing all the detail. And that's fine. But if you did want to see all the detail and capture the color and everything in a scene, you have to combine the right lens with the right camera under the right circumstances to deliver that. And that's what we've tried to do. Once again, we're trying to go after what the hardest thing is.
Right.
Because you're going to always knock it down. You can always make it look like something worse than it is. You can't always take something worse and make it look better.
Right. Well, and speaking of comparison, I feel like that's why, obviously if you don't live next to a rental house, it's very difficult. But if anyone has the opportunity to do like a lens test with a bunch of different things, it's fascinating when you have the same camera, the same observer, how wildly different color can look. You're like,
Yes.
oh, if I've seen this a bunch, like, you slap 2 apparently the same lens on 2 different cameras, and one's a little more magenta and one's a little more pink and green, and you're like, oh, so we need to calibrate the cameras. It's like, I bet it's the lens.
So that's something that's really interesting, because for a long time people would take a little green out of our white balance presets. So if you went to 3200, the DIT would go in into the CC menu and say go to -3, pull a little green out. And we always wondered why that was. And actually, as a DP, I found myself doing that, but I found I wasn't doing it all the time, and I couldn't quite figure out why. I eventually learned that our older cameras used a mid-range ultra prime as a white balance reference, because when you set the white balance, you have to look through the camera at something. And ultra primes are very neutral to maybe a little bit cool. And so if you put on a warm lens, it was going to start looking maybe a little yellow green.
Mhm.
And now with signatures, what signatures are the new reference lens going forward, starting with the Alexa 35, you put the warm lens on it, it looks a lot more normal now.
Gotcha. Because that, yeah, that wasn't always a thing with, or that was always a thing that I noticed with Alexa footage was that it would always appear green off rip. But to be fair, most DPs would prefer green over magenta, it seems. Um, and that kind of built-in greenness, I found shooting mostly with Canon, I found myself like starting to, and especially when I was younger, just going, I guess that's what it's supposed to look like, It's like, that's the pro camera. I must green, and shift everything that way. But it's because of ultra primes.
Yeah, in that case, it was just the preset
That's
was
so
captured
funny.
through a very neutral to slightly cool lens. And yeah, and now signatures are warmer by 100 or 200 degrees Kelvin.
Mm.
So it's not really an issue anymore.
Yeah, the because I remember the article that borderline saved my life was that you wrote was when you made the matrix comparing or like
Oh,
shifting the Canon the 300 to the Alexa.
mhm.
And the reason I say it almost saved my life is because I went and did that with every Canon camera over here at a rental house, and then made them as picture profiles that people could buy.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that happened right at the pandemic. And had I not done that, I would have been on the street. So I
Wow,
did
that's
steal your
cool.
idea. I'm sorry, but I'm here today because of it.
I give it freely. That was fun. That was kind of born out of frustration that, at the time, a lot of, it went early on, ARRI cameras were expensive and I couldn't get them on every job. So I just spent a lot of time trying to get other cameras to look like ARRI cameras. And yeah, I could never really get there. I think I could make things better. And I kind of look back at that now and knowing what I know now, and I'm not sure I should have even tried. I guess I'm glad I did, but
Me
there's
too.
so much, yeah, there's so much going on in these cameras now. It's and there's a lot of stuff that I don't know that,
Well,
closely guarded secrets in locked rooms that
right.
I would just love to know.
Well, and my whole thing with those picture profiles was like, it's not going to make your camera look like an Alexa, but if you shoot this next to an Alexa, it'll make it slightly easier in the grade.
And
And that was like my only promise. And people
yeah,
seem to be like, all right, close enough. And I do think, to be perfectly honest, I do think there is a um, placebo effect. Like people will use the K1S1 LUT
mm,
after just a regular color space transform and be like, it looks like an Alexa now. It's like, does it? Do you have an Alexa? Did you test it? Or are you just happy that you get a serviceable image when you do this? Um, but yeah, the whole like it makes it look like an Alexa, I think must be the most common reference point that people have. Like every camera is always like, how close does this? No one does that with red. Oh my, I tried. I matched my C500 perfectly with a LUT to
oh,
the
interesting.
Raptor. I mean,
Oh,
it's dead on. I did the same thing with the LF actually. That was a little less dead on, but the C500 Mark II specific, I guess mine, because you always have to like at what granularity can you say this is acceptable? But my
mm.
C500 with that LUT, I got it 98% to the Raptor, and I put that online, and I was like, "Who wants like free Raptor?" Zero people want that. They don't care.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess we have been the gold standard for a long time. The thing that really upset people is when we did make the change from long C3 to long C4.
Mm.
We fixed things that were technically wrong in log C3 that people really liked.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
think I think the biggest one is that we used in log C3 all the tools that every other manufacturer uses in terms of mathematics. And when I talked to our R&D team, they said the biggest part of the look is by far the back end processing of whatever the math, however you build that look. And using all those tools, we did really well. But what we couldn't get was the perceptual brightness. We couldn't get that right.
Mm.
So you can get the hue right, but it will be brighter or darker than you would perceive it if you were actually just looking at it. And I noticed this, it's in greens, it's in magentas, it's in skin tone. And the skin tone is the one that people really miss.
Right.
There seems to be this desire to go back to 5247, back to the 80s, which is,
It's a good stock.
yeah, it's a good stock, but it makes skin look a very particular kind of muted orange kind of color. And that was what our old color science used to deliver.
Mm.
And the new color science gets everything right. And I have actually been in situations where I've got a camera, I've got a monitor next to me, and I'm shooting something in daylight. And I did this with LaCroix sparkling water cans the first time. So we were going to show the camera to a rental house. And before they came in, we had all these LaCroix sparkling water cans on the table. And the light was coming in it was just skylight coming in. And the camera was aimed at the table. And I looked at the monitor and I went back and forth and they looked the same. So I went to the cafe, got a bunch more cans out of the refrigerator, lined them up against the monitor, and then just looking back and forth, I could see they were the same. And those were really strange colors. There's a lot of colors in there that cameras don't like cyan is a really difficult one. Purples and
Purple. Oh,
magentas
it's
and
yeah, cheese.
red is yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of really strange colors, and the Alexa 35 delivered all of them, and that was a big wow moment for me. But there's a lot of people who say we really liked those aberrations in color that we got from the old color science. So there's at least one guy who is selling a LUT that tries to turn your Alexa 35 into a mini, which I think is awesome. When I talk to our R&D team, they say, "Why would we do that? This is so much better."
Right.
It is, but yeah. So it's been interesting going through this transition because we don't change things like that very often. It took 12 years to get around to doing that, but it had a big impact when we did. And people are now getting used to it. And some people really like it because they know that's another thing. It's really hard to get a camera to reproduce something that's perceptually very close to what your eye sees. But the closer we can get it to that, the more space you have to push things around.
Well, and that was actually something I was going to bring up was I think, with lenses, obviously you've got sharpness charts or whatever they're called, focus charts. Those never tell the whole story. Those just tell you about resolution. With cameras, it's always that Macbeth chart, where you'll throw it in resolve and then you'll make it like I see this all the time on Reddit. People going like, oh, I'm starting out coloring, and they'll be like, shoot a chip chart and then do the thing in resolve where it automatically. I'm like, you're not gonna like it. First of all, I don't know how good that feature is, but quote unquote accurate colors aren't what you want. 9 times out of 10, you want it, with a little bit of, I suppose, style to it. But when I was talking to Buddy about cameras, what's his name? I don't have my phone. Your guy, the camera team,
Chase.
He was talking about, the main colors are like Coke red, skin, sky, and grass. Like those need to look the way we imagine them, not the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that sort of ethos comes through when you guys design lenses. Like those colors need to be, just because the camera makes it look correct technically, legally, the lens has to agree with that as well. I assume.
Yeah, we did take a little leeway because from what I'm told, like you can use leaded glass still to make lenses in Eastern Europe.
Mm.
Leaded glass solves a lot of problems.
Damn it,
It
EPA.
really, yeah, exactly. What's a few workers to make some good lenses? So yeah, we won't do that. Partially because it takes a lot to protect the workers, and then partially because what do you do with the toxic waste? It just doesn't make sense. But there's another glass that we found that does the same stuff. It's just a little warmer. And when we looked at it, it's about the same hue as skin tone.
Mm.
So it's maybe 100 degrees. The primes are about 100 degrees warmer than neutral, and the zooms will be 200 to 400 depending, because there's a lot more glass in them. But it pops skin really nicely. So that was kind of an artistic decision that we decided to go with. So you're not getting the perfectly accurate color to the camera through that lens, but perceptually it's going to look really nice.
Right.
And a lot of the color, I think, also has to do with how we handle flare, which is really good. And actually, we improved the lens mount for it was the PL mount for the Alexa 35. You can take an old PL mount off a Mini or a mirror and put it on an Alexa 35, but the stray light protection is not the same, because on that camera you had 7.8 stops over middle gray, and the Alexa 35 you have 9.3. That's a big difference. I mean, that's like 4 times more in terms of highlights if I'm getting them out.
Right.
So we had to build a new PL mount for the Alexa 35 to make sure that that stray light was controlled. Because if you have a camera with that kind of dynamic range and you don't do that, then what's the point? Your color is going to get milked up. Your shadows are going to come up. And actually, that's another interesting thing that signatures do. I don't know how we do it, but it's something to do with the coatings. But they have a toe like film. So instead of the contrast going down into the shadows like that, it kind of rolls off at the bottom. But you still have, so they feel low contrast, but you still have a pure black if it's in the frame. Because a lot of lenses, when they're low contrast, it just means the veiling layer has brought everything up.
Right.
But in these, you can see in the shadows, but if there's a black in there, you still get that. It's really interesting. Enzos are a little different. Enzos are a little contrastier because they're less expensive lenses, and they do have more of a steeper fall off, so they feel a little snappier.
Were the Enzos designed as the more like affordable package?
So if the signatures are the new Master Primes, and the Enzos are the new Ultra Primes.
Gotcha.
But more advanced, I would say, because the close focus is crazy. I can get down to, on a Mini LF, I can get down to that tall, the height of my hand, on all of the lenses except for two, the 10 and the 14, 10.5 and the 14. If we focus that close, you'd be inside the lens. So we didn't go quite that far.
That's a specialty lens.
Yes.
What are you guys designing for the 265 then? Is there like because obviously that's going to be there's going to be less people shooting that just overall.
Yeah, I'm less involved in that because it's on the rental side, but they are cooking up some interesting stuff with a lot of character, because that's where they live. So we live on the side where we're trying to give you the best image possible, and you can push it around later. They're trying to give you custom looks that only they can deliver, which is kind of the rental house thing now. Is everyone wants to have something that you have to go back to that rental house for, because you can only get it there.
Right.
But they've done a really good job with some of the things they're working on. I don't know how much I can talk about, but there are some very interesting things coming with a lot of character that's designed to work really well with the 265. And that's about all I can tell you. I've seen at least one of them, and it was really cool. And it was exactly what they described. You know, there are things that if it was on a camera with a smaller sensor, I would say, yeah, that's interesting. It's maybe a little crazy, but with the big sensor, that craziness actually starts becoming subtle.
Yeah.
And it's a really different look.
You know, I was thinking about this the other day, because I'm too online, because I like, part of me, it's as wanting to maintain my status as an educator. I do try to stay on like Reddit and stuff to see what people are asking, what people are talking about, to see if there's something I can elucidate. But it's getting harder and harder, because like the breakdown between what stuff is called and what people perceive is starting to really get out there. And I was thinking the other day about how there was this crab bucket mentality about full frame. There was like, remember that whole, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, there was this whole, you don't need every YouTube video, you don't need full frame. And I was kind of on the same boat. And I to this day, you don't need it. Obviously, the A35 is not full frame. But I am now, having owned that C500 and used like an LF and stuff, I'm like, it is nicer. Like, if I could have a 265, I probably would use that over, you know, lens choices notwithstanding. I do kind of like a bigger sensor now. They got me.
Well, you can lease the 265.
I can lease
it's gonna be a little expensive, but
I'll have to sell the entire apartment building.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really expensive to make.
I can
I mean,
imagine.
our sensors are custom, which is how we get so much out of them. But yeah, making a sensor that big it's a big deal. I mean, you have a lot of failures for every sensor that comes out correct because
Yeah.
it's an analog process in the end making a sensor. So sometimes it works really well, and every once in a while you'll get something silicon didn't do what it was supposed to do. So yeah, they're pretty pricey. It's interesting though because a lot of there are people who have very strongly held opinions on which to use. Some people just go back and forth, that whatever project that's right, they just choose whichever works. But some people really like large format or
Yeah.
those additional, I think, depth cues.
For me, it's definitely the tonality of having more photo sites. I found that because like going back to like the articles that you wrote and stuff, the things that always I loved was like you were able to highlight like here's one factor isolated that here's like the bouquet of things that this one factor has, and I would just kind of min max everything when I was starting out. Like every purchase I ever made was always like doing all right. That's an isolated thing. All right, that's fine. I'm happy with that level. All right, this versus what I think now is like, oh, it's an FX3. They shot the creator on it. Get that, like, but don't you
Yeah,
want to know? There's so many things. Uh, but that I say all that to ask you, like, obviously going from DP to working at ARRI, I'm sure you've learned quite a bit that DP you would have loved to have known, however many years ago, 5, 10 years ago. But I was wondering if any of those things come to mind that you would tell like DP you now that you have all this backed up knowledge.
I don't know if I want to tell anyone. The thing is, I think the more you know, the more you realize that everything you knew was wrong. Um, I remember just learning about light meters and the fact that they're most sensitive to green because there's there's green in everything. Usually, it's the red and the blue that change, and that's where your color temperature comes from. The problem is if you're metering something that's blue or red, it may come in a stomp darker. But that nobody ever notices because what does an underexposed pure red or pure blue look like anyways? But the more you learn about stuff like that, you kind of go, oh, here's a good one. Focus ramping. I didn't know about this. I when I started at ARRI, I wanted to reverse engineer signatures to really understand the look because I knew I liked the look, but I didn't know why. So I lined up a bunch of lenses and I shot the same subject. And I noticed that all the other lenses, it was like a 75 to 85, depending on the manufacturer, at about 6 feet. All the other lenses looked about a half to two-thirds of a stomp darker than the signature.
Mm.
So I emailed Munich and I said, so what's going on that our lenses are magically brighter than all these other ones? And they didn't understand what I was talking about. They were very confused. And I finally sent them a lineup. I stitched all the pictures together and sent it to them. And they said, oh, that's focus ramping. Okay, what's focus ramping? Well, T-stops are set looking through the center of the lens at infinity. And when you focus closer on a lot of lenses, the T-stop will change. It'll get smaller.
Interesting.
And it happens on most every lens. It's most noticeable, I guess, starting at like 40 or 50 and up. But a 75 at 6 feet, every other lens I looked at did this, and signatures didn't. And then I checked Enzos, and Enzos don't do it either. And they're doing something in there to eliminate this. But I had no idea this was a thing, yet every lens I'd ever shot on did this.
Right. Well, and it's one of those things too, as a cameraman, like a lot of times you just deal with the image you've been given, it's like, oh, if you notice, you're like, oh, that's darker or whatever, got to go. Like, just shoot it. We'll
Yeah.
Or take some ND out or whatever. But yeah, I never would have known. That's crazy that focusing can change that. And it makes sense. You're moving light rays around, but
yeah. And also, like every lens will have illumination fall off at the edges, but it's really interesting when you can actually get in and look at the equipment that measures that and just see how it changes from lens to lens. So, for example, signatures will do that wide open. It's a nice fall off at the edges. You don't really notice it, but there's a little vignetting effect. There's a cat's eye that's really nice. Enzos drop off a little sharper, a little faster, and a little farther. Um, and it has an effect on rack focusing. So one thing I was told was whenever I look at focus breathing on a lens, I should stop down to about T8, because if you're wide open and the background goes out of focus too fast, you won't be able to see the breathing. It'll just go out of focus. But if you stop down, that's when you can really see the size change happening that you may not notice wide open. And if you're always shooting wide open, you'll never see it. But if you go outside and you stop down to a 4 or 5, 6, and then suddenly you do a rack focus, you're going to go, it's going to be really distracting. But it's interesting with illumination fall off, it creates the perception that things are going out of focus in a different way. So if you have more fall off at the edges, that basically means the aperture at the edges is smaller. So
Right.
you actually have a little more depth of field at the edges. So when you go out of focus, the center is going to go out faster, and it almost feels like it's going like that, like the center is coming towards you, like it's going out faster than the sides are. That's a subtle effect on signatures. On the endos, it's a bit stronger, but it's really interesting because if you're shooting something like a brick wall or something with texture, it really does feel like bulging towards you. It's this really interesting sensation.
Right. But it's bulging without like curvature. It's perceptual.
It's perceptual. It's just the center is more out of focus than the edges. So the edges don't feel like they're doing much, but the center is going out of focus. So it feels like there's this depth effect happening. It's really not.
I've seen, obviously it's not corrected for this or it's not intentional. So it's like, I guess the worst version of what you're talking about, but sometimes using, whatever, Super 35 lenses on full frame, because most of them do cover, especially at the longer, it's fine. But I think it was one of my Nicors or something. Maybe not. Maybe, you know what? It was, no, the Nicors are full frame. I think it was my Sigma 18 to 35. I chucked it on my C500 and I noticed that like the focus would come back at the edges. So it'd be like out of focus, out of focus, and then it'd be back in focus around the edges. And I was just like, what the hell? Like I was shooting a fashion thing and I was like, I don't know if I like that.
That could be field curvature also, but
Right.
Illumination fall off will do that as well. Yeah, that's really interesting. The most interesting thing I saw, and I won't name who made the lenses, but I got called in by a friend that operated a B camera on a corporate job, and he had, I would say, some affordable zooms. Let's say one was it was a wide zoom and a long zoom, and he lit for the wide zoom, and the contrast on the long zoom didn't match at all.
Right.
The shadows fell off a cliff. So clearly the wide zoom was lower in contrast and the longer lens was higher in contrast, and he couldn't get them to match at all. The client kept saying, "What's going on with this? This is crazy." So that was a really interesting lesson. There's so much to know. Oh,
I know.
It just goes on forever.
And the thing that I do, I don't know if you feel this way, but the more that I've done this podcast, the more that I've, read things that like you read and other people have read, the more I learn, the more I get the ASG magazines, the less I care about the new information, because like it's like I've learned so much and the new information rarely moves. It's always interesting. It's always like, look at this new feature, look at this new lens, look at this. But then it's always like at the end of the day, when I'm standing there on set, like, I'll choose ARRI because I know it's always gonna match, it's always gonna work, right? That's at now as a working DP, like that's all I really care about. It's like, oh, but this new whatever does XY, it's got 8K now, and I don't care. I don't like, I know enough about resolution now that I don't care. It's fascinating how, and then there's always more, which is fun. I love learning, so it is fun to learn those things. But like functionally, I find myself being a bad teacher because it's like, it doesn't matter. They don't know it doesn't matter. Like they want to know why it doesn't matter. So I find myself fighting with that all the time.
I made really pretty pictures when I had no idea what I was doing, and I still don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
And now I know a lot more, and you kind of have to start. One thing I found that I was doing later in my DP career was I would learn all this stuff, and then I would use it to deal with everything in prep that I could eliminate that was going to cause problems. So I would get on set and just shoot. There were certain things I did that I just did habitually. For example, I got burned by an HMI with a magnetic ballast, and it went off speed. I was at 180-degree shutter, 24 frames, and didn't see the roll bars going through the frame at the time. But in post, boy, they showed up. They showed up really, really clearly. So then I went to a 144 shutter for everything. And
Just by default?
Yeah, because that's 160. Well, it's 1/60th of a second. You don't really see any more motion or less motion blur, and it puts you right in the middle of the flicker free window in a 60 hertz country. So if you're shooting in a store and there's an old fluorescent tube in the back with a ballast that's starting to go, you have more leeway before it shows up than you do at 180 at 24, because 180 at 24 puts you right on the edge of where stuff's going to start to happen.
Right.
So it doesn't have to go very far before it shows up. So I just started doing that, and I had noticed that exit signs in stores would flicker, and Christmas time, Christmas lights would flicker. Yeah, if I just went to 144, everything cleaned up. So I just and actually I had learned this when I was a camera assistant, because I had a DP that I worked with on a TV show who just said 144 all the time. He had gotten burned once by HMIs flickering when the generator went off speed. He said never again. And after a while, I came to understand and appreciate that. So that's the kind of stuff I felt like I would learn, and then I would just start building into my routine.
Right.
So I didn't have to think about it anymore. But I completely relate to what you're saying.
Well, the big one for me now is not wanting to think about it is I invested in a color meter because, boy, I hated, you got lights from multiple manufacturers, whatever, and it just bugged the hell. And this resulted in a great article on Pro Video that still gets people like commenting on it and I was like, hey Jeremiah, do we get paid more if people comment? And he was like, no. But because you type 5600 in the back of the light, is it question would bug the hell. I'd be on set like micromanaging lights, and so I just got the color meter. It's $1,800, and I've never slept better. You just boop, yep, that matches. Boop, yep, that matches the incoming window light. We're good. Took 30 seconds, and I don't have an ulcer.
Well, okay, so I did get myself in trouble with a color meter once, because so a couple of my gappers said that whenever we go into a situation with fluorescence, they only ever use about 2/3 of the correction, because to go all the way, it just doesn't look right. And I didn't understand why until I shot. It was a spot with shooting inside a car and pushing all the light through the window. And of course, the window was green.
Right.
So we put in some minus green to take that out and on the meter, it looked fine. But the image, everyone looked really ruddy, and we had to fix it in post. And what I realized is that the color meter is sampling 3 points, but it's not really telling you. I mean, maybe you have a more sophisticated one.
I have the C800 that was made for 4 LEDs, 4 fluorescent. Yeah.
So this one, it was basically telling me when I took the green out of the window, but it wasn't telling me that the shape of the spectral response of the gel was a complete mismatch for the window in terms of what the gel was designed to do. So that was an interesting little educational moment. What's interesting about lights, though, so we have Alexa mode in our lights now,
and KinoFlow.
Oh yes, so yeah, I think I know they have kind of a LUT system.
Yeah, but it's only like 4 it's only 4. It's like the Panavit, the DXL, the Alexa, I want to say Venice, and Barry Cam. I think the only 4 they have right now.
This one was, so this is really interesting. One thing I didn't realize is that CRI only measures how your eye sees things.
Right.
So when manufacturers talk about CRI, it has nothing to do with how the camera sees.
Yep. That was the other reason I got the color meter. I was like, TM30, baby, give me the real shit.
Yes, TM30. Yes. That's what we use. So what was interesting is also to know that the green primary for the human eye and the green primary for Rec 2020 are different greens. And the camera is going for Rec 2020. The actual green is farther around if you've got the CIE chart, 2020 is a triangle over here in the corner, but you've got all this as well. And the human eye is somewhere over here. Well, if the light is tuned up so green is here for your eye, it's going to look too green on camera.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of lights do look too green, because they're going for the only common reference there really is, which is the human eye, because all cameras see things a little bit differently.
Right.
So Alexa mode does a bunch of stuff. It tries to give you the best spectral response by balancing the output of the LEDs, but it also brings that green back. So by eye, it looks a little magenta if you switch between it, but on camera, it looks dead on. That was really interesting. There was something else about that too. It seems to work on other cameras, because we have looked at other cameras from other manufacturers just to see if they benefit, and it seems to work. And it's what I've been told in the past is everyone is using the same basic dyes for their color filter arrays, because there's only so many materials that will pass remotely the right spectral part of the spectrum for red, blue, or green. They tend to be a lot sloppier than prism cameras, so there's a lot more overlap, but you can do it. And that will actually adhere to the sensor in the right way. So everyone's using kind of the same stuff. The only thing it seems you can really control is the crossover. So basically you can say, if these are like this, if they're crossing over a lot, I can make them a little more saturated, and I can change that crossover point. Or I can change this one, make this a little bit more less saturated, and this one a little more. And you can kind of tune it that way. But the basic colors are all the same. And that seems to be why this light, as far as we can tell, looks it helps everything so far that we've tested.
And this is the new the Sky Panel X.
This is the Sky Panel, yes, the X21, and the orbiter. There's an upgrade that you can turn an orbiter into. You can give it the same modes, because it's the same color engine.
Gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, I don't. Because you guys are the 800-pound gorilla, I don't often get, I got my Kino Flow LEDs, and I got my Mega Light Cloth, and that, especially when I'm doing interviews, like big ass soft source that you can fit in a backpack, that's coming with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had one corporate client where we always use their internal package, and what we did was we took 4x4 black white cards and scored them, cut them in half, and then put them back together with tape and enough of a gap that you could fold them. And I had 4 of those, and you could stick them on a cart and wheel them through doorways. And then when you got there, you could unfold them. And I could do a lot with those 4 bounce cards. I could block a window. I could create a big soft. So I could do all sorts of stuff. So yeah, you get to be really creative.
I'm gonna have to make those, because that's a great idea.
Well, my lighting. Yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Like the lighting that I have right now, it's from this window. But what I would do in an interview situation, I would set up one of those cards here, white face in, and then the back would be just behind my head, and it would go forward. And then I'd take another one, black side in, and put it right here. And then I put the light behind this one to light that one. So I'd have a big soft source, negative fill. If I needed a little fill, I could take a piece of typing paper and just stick it up on there with a little piece of tape.
Right.
And I did so much. I spent years figuring out how to make it that simple.
Yeah, my thing now is just using the color meter, finding the window, and then just tuning whatever.
Yeah.
And then just making it match, so that it's all, which is technically what I've done here. I'm technically have a light here, but there is a big window. But I'm also such a dork. This is my office, so I can manipulate it to stay. So I have a big piece of 251 covering the entire window. So the whole, and then I have a light.
what you're doing is a really great trick that I learned a long time ago watching a DP on a TV show. I was B camera operator and I came in and I saw he was always putting the fill on the same side as whatever the dominant light source was.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried it and it worked so well to clean up faces and like really fast. Because if you, and also it added a lot more tonality to it, because if you're doing something where you're just soft light fill, you get two tones.
Right.
But if you have, soft light, less soft light, and then this falls off, you get a range, and it's really interesting. And if I was in a situation where I couldn't move the light coming in through a window, well, you put a filler on the same side, and you kind of tone it down, you wrap it around. Yeah, that's a great trick.
Yeah. The one you'll appreciate that I did, and then I'll let you go because I know I've kept you over. I took a bounce card, like I just went to whatever, the art store. And so I think it's probably like 3x2, something like that. And I taped this like metal bracket to it, just like a piece of flat metal. And then from the top of it, taped some of the extra 251 I had. So I just had this thing, right? And then I have this inflatable balloon light that has magnets on the back. And with the color meter, I found out it's a very cheap light. It was like $30. But it fits in your back pocket when it's deflated. And I needed to basically get into this very small bar. So I took the show card with the metal thing, and then I blew up the inflatable light magnet, and then the diffusion was hanging down, and I angled it off a C-stand like that. So it was like kind of a, I don't know, 45-degree angle, and then magnet showing the light through the diffusion. And dude, I have to send you some of the stills. Like, it looks incredible. I was so proud of myself.
Really good. Wow. That's great. That's really smart. Yeah. I saw, as soon as you said magnet, I went, oh, I think I know where this guy's going.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I got into some stuff like that where I was trying to get like a key grip on a job too. We had a 12 by bounce, and I wanted him to just tie like a 12 by half grid to the front of it, and then just tilt it like that and let the diffusion hang. Oh, that'll never work. No, he talked me out of it. And like 2 months later, we're on a job and we're doing something similar, like a book line. He just does that. Like, oh, where do you figure that? Oh, I got that from some DP somewhere. It works great. Wait a minute.
Yeah, you jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can do that. Like, even one thing that I've done is basically the exact same setup. Actually, it's the same fucking thing, but I put you just get the whatever baby clamp with the pin, whatever that's called, Cardellini clamp with the pin, and then just attach it to the bottom of the C-stand and shoot it up into the bounce, and then through the diffusion you got your little and it extends the length for you, and you get the nice if you need like a one stand solution.
It's funny. The two best purchases I ever made were, I bought 2 6x grid cloths, a full grid and a light grid, and I found so many uses for that. And one of them was I had these two, I think they were Kino Celebs, that came in a kit with whatever gear I had rented, and I wanted to turn them into a big soft source. And so I just put them together, but then they still weren't soft enough. So then I just clipped the diffusion to the top door and let it hang. Oh, this is great. And there's a guy in Australia who did some videos about, he calls it mushrooming, where he'll take a light like that and just throw diffusion over the top of it. And it looks great. No, that you're definitely doing all the right stuff. So that's really cool.
Well, I very much appreciate that, but I'll show you the one thing that I bring on every shoot, and it's worked. I've needed it every time. One set. Shower curtain. Big ass shower curtain. This cost me $5 at Ross or whatever. I use it all the time because it's like we were shooting in Dallas, and we just had these big windows at this Airbnb, and we didn't have like a gaffer for one of the shoots. Shower curtain, the same thing. Too many disparate lights, shower curtain. I can fit a T-bar in a backpack now. Everything's so small.
Wow.
Shower curtain. And it looks great.
It really does. It's funny. I was walking through my brother-in-law's laundry room at his house on a winter day, and he had a leak, and there's a bunch of painter's drop cloths or something he taped up over the windows, and the winter sun in the distance coming through that. This was the most amazing laundry room I've ever seen. Everything glowed. It was fantastic, and that's what what you're describing. I'm sure that has the same kind of vibe. I found there was one. I was doing a lot of work in small sets for this one company, and I found if I put shower curtain over the top of it, I could put lights down through it, just Fresnels, and it caused enough of a glow that I could put it right there, and it would be soft, but I could keep it off the back wall. But it was a little bit of a fire hazard. So.
LEDs have helped in many ways.
Yes. That's how old I am, pre-LED.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember this. It sounds so stupid now, but I remember feeling like I had finally made it, and I was shooting a medical information thing where like the acting was like intentionally over the top because we're supposed to be showing you like if a patient does this, do that, and you're not supposed to be subtle about it. And the guy who ran the studio we were shooting in, it was like a medical studio for this that they built years and years ago. And he was still on tungsten everything. And luckily he had working air conditioning. But I remember feeling like I hadn't made it. I was like, I'm finally a real DP because they had a zip light. I had never seen a zip light in person. And I was like, oh shit. That's David Fincher used that, whatever, that was on Fight Club. And now, yeah, some of that mystery is gone when you see it. You can get a sky panel at a really good price now. But yeah, well, I'm sorry I kept you over a little bit.
That's not a problem.
We should just have you back on to talk about all the various camera tricks you've learned, because I think many DPs would. It's a lot easier to talk about it for an hour than write an article. So
yes, and I would love to do that. Yeah, I would. That's one thing we've had a discussion about that here. Is like, well, I could write articles for BBC. Yeah, but that's going to take you out of action for like 2 days.
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, I would love to go back.
Cool. Well, yeah, write down a little list. I'll write down a little list, and then we can just go back and forth about, all right, I have a new idea, and I think that'd be a fun one.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Cool. Well, lucky for me, I 5 years of this podcast, I just now got an offer of sponsorship. So, the company Visco? VSCO. It used to just be a phone app, but now they have all kinds of like film emulation plugins for Lightroom. They want to sponsor the podcast. So
interesting.
I'm about to hop on a call with them next.
Good for you.
I know, because fucking Glenn Garland gets like I'm gonna cut this out. He gets like $5,000 an episode. Like the ACE pays for it.
Really?
And like Film Tools gets a cut or whatever. And I was just like, how do I do that? And then Avery's just like, well, figure it out. And I was like, what? Come on, somebody help. But yeah, hopefully, it's not super film making adjacent, but it's close enough. And the metrics say that everyone who listens to this is either my age or your age. So they probably also are camera people, like they take photos and stuff. So, because I was very much like, I'm not going to come out here and take a better help. That's not, or whatever, some, liquid.
Some random.
Yeah.
Here's how you can get food delivered.
Yeah. It's like, I'd rather you keep the money. I'd rather just make it a free education resource. But I'm going to hop onto that call now. So I appreciate your time, and let's do the cameraman one soon.
Please. I enjoy this, and I'd love to do it again.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.